Right, so good evening and welcome to I think we're either the 8th or the 9th. I think it's the 9th, is it, Lynn? I think it is the 9th
Yes.
webinar
Yep.
for 2021, the IOH, the Association of Occupational Health and Wellbeing Professionals. This evening, we're joined by the Leva Clinic, and I'm going to let the panel introduce themselves. So thank you very much, guys, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Neil. So on our panel tonight, we have Shauna. Shauna, please wave. She is a patient living with lived experience of chronic pain. Shauna is an advisor to the Leva Clinic. She has a blog on disability, which is shaunalouise.com, and she's a freelance writer. We also have Jane. Jane, please wave. Thank you. Jane is a consultant nurse. She's been a nurse for more than 20 years. She's a specialist in chronic pain. Jane is known to be a thought leader in chronic pain. She's right now involved with the International Women in Business group called ISAW, ISAW, for those who do not know. And she's a chronic pain in the workplace specialist. We also have Dr. John O'Sullivan. John, please wave. Hello. John is our lead clinical psychologist. He's a clinical psychologist on the NHS, and he's a specialist in chronic pain. And good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Benjamin Ijaris de Lesenio. I am the Chief Medical Officer and co-founder of Leva Clinic. And Leva Clinic is the first CQC-registered digital clinic for patients with persistent pain. We are offering a range of services, from private consultations to patients up to back to work services to industrial groups. We provide care to patients according to the biopsychosocial model of care, which involves therefore nurses, clinical psychologists, physiotherapists, and consultants. And you can find us on levaclinic.com, L-E-V-A, levaclinic.com. Thank you very much to all the participants to this webinar for joining us tonight. And we will be discussing how we can support the employees of a business through chronic pain. We are going to talk about different things, and I'm going to present broadly the agenda of the discussion today. It's going to be a panel discussion between our experts, and it's going to be followed by a session of Q&A to make sure that you can ask us all the questions that you have in mind. We're going to discuss the setup for patients that have chronic pain, how their workstation can be set up. We're going to discuss how to risk assess a work from home office for patients with chronic pain. We're going to talk about communication between the patient with chronic pain and their team, as well as their employer. We're going to talk about mental health, about the importance of movements in chronic pain. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about medication. I know that many of you have in mind the new NICE guideline, and of course, we're going to discuss all of those points with regards to the experience of our experts, as well as the new NICE guideline. Without further ado, I'm going to first ask Shauna the first question. So Shauna, what do you think is an optimal workstation setup for patients with chronic pain?
Yeah, thank you. So it's different for everyone, really. And I think that is kind of a key factor throughout this whole thing, is that you need to look at this from a very individual standpoint. You know, what works for one person isn't going to work for another. But in terms of sort of me working from home, I think key for everyone, not just people living with chronic pain, is having a very separate workstation to the rest of your life, you know, keeping that work-life balance very kind of strict and key, because it becomes very easy to slip into blurring the lines. And not only does having a separate sort of workstation and work area help, you know, when you're actually working, it also helps in terms of you know, a lot of people find it difficult to switch off from work. And I think when you're working from home, that is even harder. But it is really important when you're living with chronic pain that you are able to switch off, and you do give yourself a very strict time of when you're going to be finishing work for the day, and making that clear to other people, because it can become very easy to slip into working late at night, and then you're going to feel the repercussions of that in flare-ups and, you know, increased symptoms and things like that in days to come. It's keeping up that balance is really important. And then also investing in a very good office chair. I think that is one of the best things that you can do, really, if you know you're going to be stationed somewhere for a while, you know, making sure that you're as comfortable as you can possibly be, as well as setting things like alarms and reminders to remind you to get up, to move, to, you know, stretch your legs, you know, do whatever you need to do to kind of disrupt that kind of, you know, sitting stationary period. It's very easy to get lost in work and to realize that you've sat down for 2 or 3 hours, and it's not until you feel pain or fatigue that you've realized that you've done that. So I think setting alarms is really important to making sure that you stick to those things.
I love to quote this study that was done by NASA about people who live in confined environments. And so before lunar missions and maybe in the future Martian missions, NASA did multiple studies of confining a couple of astronauts in 2 rooms, 5 astronauts in 2 rooms for 3 months. And definitely they looked at the effect of separating workstations from live stations, and have confirmed that if you're within a very confined environment, it has an enormous impact on productivity and well-being to separate your quote unquote play area, life area, and work area. And definitely having a dedicated desk station, not just working on your bed or working in your bedroom or working at your kitchen table can help.
Yeah. It also means that when you do take those breaks and those rests, they actually are breaks and rest. If you're still within your work environment, then it is going to be very easy. You know, you hear a noise on your laptop to just keep going back and forth.
Absolutely, absolutely. Jane, is that something that you've discussed with your patients?
Yeah, certainly something that does come up a lot is that, and at work as well as at home, you know, is that people have desks that are static, that they have to sit at for a lot of jobs, or that aren't ideal even for people who don't live with pain. So certainly it's something that we encourage more and more for patients who are desperately wanting to stay in work to discuss with employers more, is to look at what they can do to make sure they've got their right workspace. And I think that Shona's quite right that keeping them separate in the home is very important as well, to make sure it's that work-life balance.
John, I saw you unmuted yourself. Did you want to add some points?
Yeah, I did. Thanks, Ben. Shona makes a really great point in that, you know, like not working in your sleeping space can be important, and like you said, keeping separation between life and work. Most people with chronic pain will report that they have difficulty with sleep, and when you ask them about their journey with sleep, pain wakes us from sleep. It's pain's job to do that. But when chronic pain persists for patients, then it's no longer useful to have disrupted sleep. So helping people to try to optimize their opportunity for sleep is quite key to a lot of psychological treatment with people. And that's one of the sort of basic foundational things with sleep hygiene and any of the sleep interventions you might do with someone. So if you think about cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, you'd be getting people to look at them. What does sleep look like for you? And if, you know, during a pandemic or during just your normal relationship with work, your sleep area has become your work area, then it's really worth thinking about how you can separate those out, and trying to support people to discuss with their employers how they might go about that. So is there any help to be lended to try to create a workstation at home separate from their bedroom? Now, like eagle-eyed of you will see that it looks like I'm in a bedroom. I am in my bedroom, and I can tell you it's not an ideal setup for working from home. So thinking broadly about those kinds of things is important, recognizing that it's a challenge to overcome as well.
And John, in your experience of dealing with patients that have sleeping disorders or sleeping problems, at least, what is your point of view with regards to screen time close to bedtime?
Yeah, there's lots of work done out there about the kind of light that comes out of our devices. So the blue light you'll have probably heard of in the media, which sort of is similar to sunlight and the process of sunlight stimulating a change in our sleep hormone melatonin that makes us more awake. So that's kind of what we're designed to do. We're designed to be awake during the day and asleep at night. Now, we're the first generation, or maybe the last 15, 20 years of our species, really, to be carrying around these devices or constantly staring at these devices that are having a role to play in that ancient mechanism of us getting tired at nighttime. Most of the advice will say, try to minimize screen time around a wind down routine on the way to bed. And that is, you'll find that in most of the sleep hygiene advice, most of the psychological therapies for people. And now that sometimes sits kind of like counterintuitively to a lot of the stuff that you might be pointed to help your sleep. So listen to this great app at nighttime to help you to sleep. You think, well, that's on my phone. How am I supposed to look at my phone and also sleep and also avoid the blue light and access the app? So you're going to have to sort of like make it work in your life a little bit. Generally, we would say try to avoid those kinds of things. If you're using something like audio, try to minimize your amount of time staring at it. Try not to get distracted by the news app or the YouTube app or the Netflix app at the same time, and to try to see if you can make real change in how you're approaching nighttime. And people usually see improvement over time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Jane, I wanted to ask you, how can you risk assess a workstation and work from home working station?
I think that as Shona alluded to when she was talking earlier, that this is very individual. So risk assessments need to be done on an individual basis. You can't do one risk assessment for a company and it apply to every employee, because every employee will be slightly different. You know, some people may be that they need to stand, some people may need to sit, some people may need both, some people may need specialist chairs, and that's all completely different. And one of the things that we've seen, and I've done quite a lot of research recently on what's out there to help employers, and I've looked at the NICE guidelines to see what they recommend for risk assessment for in the workplace. And yes, there is an assessment criteria, but it's very open, very loose. And I suppose it needs to be very open and very loose because everybody is different. But I think it's important that if an employee comes needing an assessment, that it's not just, oh, well, this is the one that we did last time we had somebody, so this will apply to you. It must be done on an individual basis and really taking into account that person's needs.
Thank you.
That, you know, that might be that they work from home, they work a mixture from home and work, and they have flexible working, or it might mean that they choose to reduce their hours, but that's something that's very individual to the employee.
Thank you. Shona, did you change a lot your workstation? Did you realize that certain things in your workstation were working against you or were creating more pain, and that you had to change since the beginning of the pandemic?
Yeah, definitely. I think kind of chairs are the biggest ones. I think a lot of people have realised over the past year that actually their chair is causing them more problems than it's helping. So kind of sorting that out has been really helpful. And then also another thing I've done is raising up my laptop to a higher height. You know, I found I was sitting looking down all day, and that was causing neck problems that I hadn't had previously. And obviously we don't want to be adding more problems to the ones that already exist. So just lifting up my laptop a little bit higher so it's eye line has helped massively.
That's a very good point. John, what is your routine, your daily routine with regards to your working station?
Yeah, so try and refine, really. Well, Shona's tip of lifting up my laptop, I worked that out pretty quickly when I started working from home. Just hunched over a laptop. In the short term's okay, but when it became sort of 7 or 8 hours worth of my day, then I needed to find a different kind of setup. And I would say that, you know, a lot of the idea that it's completely individual is important. So, whatever, chronic pain being a sort of a broad umbrella, the number of different kinds of presentations and conditions that sit under that are plentiful. And you need to figure out, what is your employee actually managing? So just to give you an example, like pre-COVID, we met a chap in our clinic who had a peripheral neuropathy. So he had pain in his feet. And his job was that he was he would work for the local authority and he would visit different sites around the borough. He found that incredibly difficult to do because every activity on his feet exacerbated his pain. And when the pandemic came along and we met him sort of like 8 or 9 months into it and we asked how his pain was, he said, actually, it's much better because I've been working from home and I've not had to walk from site to site. So actually, you think that nothing has changed about that person's biology. The context around that person has changed. So it's not a one size fits all. That gentleman's now going back to his local authority and trying to figure out, what kind of mix can I have to be a valuable member of your staff where I can still do a bit of that, but also retain a bit of a home working or desk-based job to help me manage my pain.
And do you get involved in conversation between a patient and their employer?
From a psychological point of view, you're spending a lot of time trying to empower that person to have those conversations and then to think with them exactly what they want to do and think through the consequences of those as well. So being realistic that a lot of people when they live with a disability have probably had the experience of having a poor relationship with their employer after disclosing a disability and perhaps being shown the door or discriminated against or not favoured. So thinking with them about what their options are in terms of how they might approach a conversation, or maybe they don't approach a conversation, what that might lead to, ultimately helping them to put the onus of control here so that they feel like they are making the choices about how they're tackling their particular disability.
Shauna, I know you interact with numerous patients with chronic pain on a daily basis. And what is your feeling with regards to this very complicated relationship between employers, even local managers, local team, and patients with persistent pain?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that even though laws exist to protect people who live with chronic pain or have a disability to enable them to work, the kind of experience that people have is often very different, and a lot of people are worried about even telling their employer that they are dealing with something, and it's not just kind of when we talk about communication, things like that, it's not just being able to tell your employer these things. It's about being in an environment where you can see that it's okay to tell your employer these things. You look at the interactions that they have with other people, how they respond to other people, and that's how you gauge whether you feel like it's okay to, start those conversations. It's a really difficult one to have, and a lot of people, have had so many different experiences over the years of people who have mentioned these things, and either they have been shown the door or suddenly there's not been any progression in their role, things have not led the way that they thought they would, and often that comes down to a breakdown of communication. I think a lot of employers hear the word disability or chronic pain and have very immediate assumptions about what that person is capable of, when in fact often all that needs to happen is a conversation, tell them what you need and provide such things. There's a lot, everything is based on these assumptions that can be broken down by honest conversations, but it's down to the employer to create an environment where people feel like they can start those conversations.
Thank you. Jane, in your experience, what would be the framework that a company would have to put together in order to be able to foster this open conversation? And what would be the topics that you think you would want to see systematically discussed?
I think there's got to be an open policy that's a very, very transparent policy that makes it so that the employees don't feel that they are going to become the underdog, that they're going to be shunned. And I think part that's going to be helped by the COVID crisis that has resulted in a lot of home working, because I think that a lot of people, certainly a lot of our patients where I work, have found life has been a lot easier, because it's not just being at work, it's the travelling to and from work, and it's that extended hours of, you know, if you live 45 minutes away from work, so that's an hour and a half a day of sitting in a car, and then not being able to park close to where you work, so you've got to walk into work as well. I think that with COVID, I think employers, they've seen that actually working from home is productive, because I think that there'll be a lot of companies thought that it wasn't going to be as productive. And for chronic pain patients, I think that they're going to be able to recognise that there is a balance, because they've probably already seen that patients that have got chronic pain are actually managing much better since having the option of working from home. So I'm hoping that that will start to open some doors, but certainly we need to be out there more, which is one of the reasons why I do what I do as a thought leader, is to educate big companies about, you know, that just because somebody has chronic pain doesn't mean that they can't work and they can't be a very valuable member of a team. You know, that doesn't occlude the other. So I think that, you know, we've got to have transparent things in place. We've got to have, if in big companies, there's got to be occupational health departments within those companies that are there to assess. And almost it needs to be that every new employee, whether they've got a chronic pain or any other problem or not, is assessed by an occupational health team when they start, to check that their chair is the right height for them, their desk is the right height for them. And if it's seen to be done for everybody, then your chronic pain isn't something different to everybody else, you know, because everybody gets that level of interaction. So other people aren't looking down on that person because they're getting something different, and or they're having to have all of that done. Everybody should get it, because when you look at how many people have chronic pain out there, and Shauna will know this better than me, how many people hide it and don't tell their employers that they've got it. And so they're struggling every day with the height of their desk, the height of their chair, the type of chair that they're using in the office and at home. But if it becomes that everybody is automatically assessed to check that they've got the right equipment, then it becomes a lot more straightforward.
Thank you. Shauna, did you feel that you have been able to have these conversations with past employers?
It's been mixed, definitely. I think there are always going to be a mix of situation. You know, there's some employers that have been incredibly helpful and, you know, very much let things be led by me, which is what I prefer. You know, they say, tell us what we need and we'll work it out some way. And, you know, and also kind of the flip side of creating an environment where you feel like you can talk. Personally, also, I don't like employers like checking in every single day, being like, how are things going, you know, asking constantly about my chronic pain. You know, I think if you create an environment where you know that people can come to you, then it's not necessary to keep doing that. And it's like Jane said, you know, when you're in this environment where you're getting something different to everyone else, you know, you do worry about people looking down on you for that and thinking, well, they're getting an advantage, when, you know, it's just equality, but that's not how it looks, you know, from the outside. So, you know, there's concerns from that side as well. But yeah, I think it's always going to be mixed. You know, I don't expect for the rest of my life that it's all going to be positive, because that's not realistic, but it's definitely getting better.
Okay, thank you. And Shauna, what do you think this relationship or difficult relationship with employers and team has an effect on a patient with persistent pain in terms of mental health? What do you think happens in their psyche when they have to discuss their pain and explain their pain and explain their capacities to their team, their manager, their employer?
Yeah, it's exhausting to have to spend your whole life, you know, explaining these things to everyone. but on top of that, it feels like it becomes, the only part of you, and especially in a work environment, I've often felt like that has become sort of the bigger part of me than what I'm there to actually do. You want to be known as the, an employee like everyone else, not the employee with chronic pain. It's part of me, it's part of my everyday life, but it's not the whole part of me. And I think, it can often feel like that sometimes. And also, if employers have a negative reaction, that can have a massive effect on you. And, in the past, I've often felt like I was incapable just because I'd not gotten what I need to do my job properly. It was never an issue with myself. It was not being provided with what I needed. And so when you have that happening constantly for people, it does kind of, dig away at you, and you start to believe, well, perhaps I can't work then, when in fact you're not just, being given what you need to work.
Thank you. John, is that what you see with your patients?
Yeah, so there's no two ways about it. Living in pain is distressing. It's distressing to people. Pain's designed to make you take action. Pain's designed to make you do something about it. When it goes on for a long time and it doesn't turn off like it should, then people's psychological well-being can be impacted. And like looking at the studies, somewhere between 40 and 60% of people who meet the criteria for having a persistent pain problem would also meet the criteria for having a diagnosis of depression. We know it's prevalent. And we know that there are mechanisms underlying both conditions. We look at it either from a sort of like a neurobiological point of view and say that there's similar neural pathways, but we can look at it from a completely behavioral point of view and know that pain impacts how we behave. It means us less able to engage in the things we wanted to do, including things like work. And no doubt about it, work is good for us. It has to be good work. It has to be meaningful work. You have to feel like you're able to contribute in meaningful ways for it to be good for us. But it's one of the things that humans do to bring meaning to their lives. So yeah, people with pain can often develop psychological distress. And if you layer those two things on top of each other and put them in a workplace, then it can be quite a difficult environment to navigate. And supporting that person to try to look after their own mental health, trying to optimize their own mental health whilst living with pain, and supporting organizations to make real sort of structural change and real kind of cultural shift towards encouraging psychological well-being programs in the workplace, helping people to look after their own mental and physical health in the workplace. That's where the focus should be in terms of trying to make a cultural shift in going into the future.
We've seen lately a major change in the workplace because, as you've said, having the meaning of going to work, having the social interaction of going to work, all of that has been taken away during the pandemic. And there's been a lot of employees and people outside of the workplace who have talked about how the burden of the pandemic on their mental health has been important. And John, how do you put together tools and tips in the workplace to make sure that you're monitoring and supporting the health, the mental health of your employees and your team?
Yeah, there has been a focus, throughout the pandemic, you hear in the media, this the kind of tsunami of mental health that might be upon us, because all the kind of incidental interactions that you would get from being able to do the things you want to do, like go to work, for instance, you chat with your colleagues, is less available to us. And, more than that, more the sort of like the physical sort of like benefits you get from, like, say, even a commute, like to work, brings health to your body, brings sort of mental health improvement to you as well. And if I'm just thinking about my own my own sort of like physical and mental health, certainly is very different now than it was pre-COVID. If you'd said to me pre-COVID, what about working from home all the time? I think that's absolutely great, brilliant. I do that all the time. But it's trade-offs, it means that it comes at the cost of being able to get incidental exercise and get incidental interaction with other humans. So we recognize that that's the context that we're in right now, and it's not an ideal context in the pandemic. So we ask people to reflect on what's really important to you. What's the nub of like, say, social interaction? What does it bring you? Well, it brings me a sense of satisfaction. It brings me closer to the people I like. So in the absence of being able to do that in the ways that you were doing that, going to the pub on a Friday afternoon, sharing lunch with someone, what is available to us right now? We don't have to do it forever, and we don't have to accept that it's optimal, but is there something that we can do that serves that need in us right now? And so, there have been sort of weird and wonderful ways of people trying to connect with one another using Zoom, using other platforms, using Friday night Zoom quizzes, other kinds of things that you're able to do remotely, sending text, doing WhatsApp, whatever it is to try to bring you closer to other humans. That improves our mental well-being, that improves our sense of self. It helps us feel like the kind of person we want to be. And like assessing for a workstation, like assessing for someone's own particulars to do with their work, it's very individual. So you have to figure out, what's available to that person, what brings them joy, a sense of joy, and help them to try to move towards that in a kind of in a planned way.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Jane, have you had any patients that have been really, really impacted by the pandemic mentally and physically?
Yeah, I've had for a number of reasons as well. I mean, we've had people that have obviously been waiting for procedures or for someone to talk for an appointment with a pain clinic that's been delayed. So that's affected mental health because they haven't had this support. But also, yeah, I've seen both sides from it. In fairness, I've had people who have said, I know it's been really difficult with the pandemic, and they've actually said, well, actually, I found it a lot better because of my limitations, because of my pain, and because I suffer with mental health problems, I struggle leaving the house, and then I feel guilty for not leaving the house. But with the pandemic, I haven't had to leave the house, so actually I feel much better, which was, and I'm able to technology suddenly had this jump, and everyone knows how to Zoom now, so you can get your social interaction, but I don't have to leave the home. So I've seen that side of it, but also the other side where people are, they are struggling. We're going to have some massive mental health problems to deal with our chronic pain patients. I'm fairly sure, because they've not been getting any support. Pain management programs and things like that we had people wanting to attend, have everything froze for a year. We haven't been able to do any of that. We're now doing them on Zoom, so that we had something to be able to offer patients. But yeah, there's going to be a lot. It's going to be many years until we recover from COVID, I think, with people's mental health.
Yeah, the new normal will last for a while. I think that's very clear. Jane, do you talk about a movement routine with your patients when they're working from home? Shona talked about putting a timer or a reminder to move, but do you have other tips that you give to your patients?
Yeah, I think I think the timer is certainly something that we try and look at, and that, or at the end of end of a task, to get up and just have a walk round. And the same when they're at work, is to do the same thing at work as well, is to try and just keep moving. What we don't want is people turning to medication, so that you're not as able to function as well because you're on medication. And we don't want people to have medication because they haven't been able to move because they've had to work so quickly. I mean, we all know that if we get involved in something, we're all as guilty as anybody for sitting there till the end to get it done, and then thinking, oh, I should have moved sooner. But I think when you've got chronic pain, you've got to be a lot more strict with yourself to move on a regular basis, which is certainly something that we say to patients. And even if it's just standing up and sitting back down again, it's something just to get the joints working again. It doesn't have to be a 15-minute walk. It just can be standing at the side of your desk and doing a couple of stretches. But on the other side of that happens with patients that we see is that it comes back to that thing of being different at work. So when you're in the workplace, that's a lot that you feel like people are watching you. It's the same thing as if you slip over in the middle of the street and fall over it. The first thing you do is to look to see who's seeing you do it. And I think people feel that at work, but when they're at home, it's much easier to put those habits into place.
Absolutely. And Shona, what's your movement routine?
Yeah, so it's still a work in progress for me. I've been living with chronic pain for 7 years, but pacing is something that takes so long to get your head round and to really get in place. I was definitely one of these people that I would, sit at my desk until the task was done, regardless of, the repercussions afterwards. It's difficult to get out of that mindset, particularly if you're someone who does well with sitting down and focusing on something for a while. Mentally I can do that, but physically in the hours afterwards I realized that I can't. And it's being able to overcome that side of it and to say to yourself, it's okay if I stop and finish now. I can start again in a few hours, it can wait until tomorrow. It's kind of mentally getting past that block, really, of thinking that everything has to be done now, it has to be done quickly, when in reality most things can wait a little bit longer. So yeah, I set myself reminders and alarms just to get up, to have a stretch, go and fill up my water bottle. I'll say, after this email then I'll get up, or setting it after tasks as well is really helpful. But you can't underestimate how difficult it is to implement that into your life. It is one of the hardest parts of living with chronic pain. Regardless of how much life you've lived before, we all have that mindset of, I need to push through, I need to get this done, and it's difficult to prioritize your own well-being.
Are you telling me that you wish you had ADHD and every 5 minutes you need to get off of your table and go do something else and then come back and then another activity?
Absolutely. It's really difficult when you have, a kind of a personality or a mindset where you're very much, you can sit and focus on something for hours, and then suddenly something appears in your life that says that doesn't suit me very well. It's a massive mental block to get past.
And I think that's one of the downsides of working from home. If you work in an office and you work 9 till 5, everybody gets up and goes home at 5 o'clock. You can sit there and you can go, do you know what? I'm just going to get this finished. It'll only take me half an hour and I'll just do this and get it finished. So, and an hour later, you're still at your desk working, and you haven't got up and had a walk around, and you haven't finished for the day. So you haven't cut off from work. And that's the really big one from working from home.
Absolutely. I talk about working from home being the most ideal setup for me personally, and it absolutely is. But also, there's that side of it of switching off, and it's great that I can set my own hours, but suddenly I find that I'm working all hours of every day instead of setting actual hours. So yeah, it's important to make sure that you are doing that.
I'm conscious of time, and I know we still have only 20 minutes, and I wanted to have a little bit of questions from the audience. So Jane, I want to ask you one of the question that has popped up in the chat, which is that what would you advise to an occupational health nurse to do when they realize that actually the chronic pain of a patient is only mainly treated with medication and drugs, and not taken care of on a more holistic level?
And they need to be referred to some sort of pain clinic to be able to be treated on a multidisciplinary level, so that the medication can stop being relied on. Because medication, we know, and we have, the one quote that I've got is that, for those people who are taking opioids, there is no research in the world that tells us of the effectiveness of opioids for chronic pain. All research is on acute pain, not chronic pain. So we know, and I do a lot of opioid reduction in patients, and patients are astounded, and it still lightens my heart every time I do an opioid reduction and a patient says to me, oh, I've got my brain power back, and I can concentrate, and I can get my job done, and I can enjoy things again. And chronic pain needs to be treated on a holistic level. It needs to be treated on a multidisciplinary level. We need therapy. We need therapy involvement. And I think this is one of the things that I've seen a big shift in our pain clinic, is that the therapy comes a lot sooner than it used to do. Our therapy, sorry, I've got a fly. Our therapy used to be almost the last thing. It's now the first thing that we look at in the pain clinic, is that, we look at medication. We look at, is there any interventions that can work on this? Is it something specific? But if not, then we look at a therapeutic approach very, very early doors now.
Thank you. Thank you. John, what do you feel is the importance of medication to your patients and how they interact with it?
Yeah, and like people are going to come to pain clinics where I'm mostly based, and invariably they'll have tried a medicine. You know, that's the first port of call when the pain doesn't go away. You go to the GP says, "We'll try this. Hopefully things will get better." And when that's not the case for some people, something like 40% of people will develop a persistent pain problem at some point in their life. And that's not the case, then they get sort of put into a health system that's pretty linear, really. So you end up seeing the MSK physio, and then if that doesn't work, you might then find yourself referred to a trauma and orthopedic department, or a rheumatology department, or a pain clinic, or any other set of specialties. And when you meet doctors, with greatest respect to you, Ben, they're medically trained. So they will look at their bag of medicine and say, well, let's try some medicine to see if that's going to improve things. And that person, having had lots of different opinions and tried lots of different things, can sometimes find themselves taking a cocktail of medicines. And when you ask them, is it working? Does it help you? You're not really sure if they can give you a proper answer. So I don't know if it's working or not. I don't know what's working, what isn't anymore. And then there's a general fear of not taking them, because if I'm taking all the things that I'm supposed to be taking for my condition because the doctors have said I should take it, and I feel like this, what happens if I don't take it? I'm going to feel awful. And people are very afraid. And so helping them to try out a different way of managing this, thinking about this from a broad perspective, about trying to maybe rely less on a medical system and more on a broadly biopsychosocial system to see if they can make changes to take a little bit more agency in their health, to see if that might in fact move them toward a life they want to lead. That's a bit of a process. And I'm glad to hear that, like, Jane's experience in a different part of the country than what I am mirrors my own, really, in that much sooner through the door are people offered a conversation with the therapy arm of services to say to the person, what do you want to do more of in your life? What is it makes you? Going to work makes me, or being a dad makes me, or being a partner makes me. Well, how about we help you try to move towards that a little bit to see if that makes the pain a little bit more bearable to work with. And generally people respond better to that because that's a holistic kind of support. And then they're more likely to be able to loosen the idea of holding on to medicines. And when they do, they feel better. They feel like no one really wants to take that much medicine, and they feel better, less foggy minded, more able to get up in the morning, more energy to do the things they want to do.
Education, I think, is a massive one on medication as well, because a lot of people who are on this cocktail of medications don't know about what each one of them doesn't know about what it's actually doing to them and the side effects. If you ask, in my experience, when you've got somebody that's on a cocktail of drugs and you ask them, are they getting any side effects? They'll tell you they're not getting any, or they're getting constipation, and that's about it. And then you give them a list of side effects that these drugs can result in, and they go, oh, I've got all of those. I thought it was my condition and not the medication. So their condition is times whatever worse because of the medication than it is without. So I've had many people who I spend probably most of my clinics reducing medication that doesn't work than I do, and educating people around medication than I do starting anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, all of you, for your answers. I want to give some time to the people present today to ask their question. I think people can raise their hand. Yes. So has anyone has a specific question and want to raise their hand? Janet, go ahead. I think you're still muted. Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't remember where the actual hand was, so you got my real one.
That's perfect.
I love the idea of reducing medication. I think that's fantastic. But how do you convince people that reducing the medication is a good idea? Because sometimes I know in our clinics, when we talk about medication, there's quite a resistance, and people seem to hang on to the fact that they need all of this layers of medication.
I think the way that I approach that one is as I said before, education. And one of the first questions I ask a patient is, You wouldn't be in a pain clinic, you wouldn't have been referred to the pain clinic if you weren't in pain. So you've come today, and I've already got visual analog scoring of their pain score. So, you know, everybody's at an 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 out of 10. Say, well, if the pain is at that level, so 10's the worst pain you can ever imagine, and you're there, then are these medications doing anything? And often you've got to start that process. It's not a quick process. It's often something that you can't do in one meeting. Family tend to be very good advocates for this, because they see the change that has become that person. You know, when this patient used to be very active and out at work, and is now suddenly living between the bedroom, the living room and the bathroom, and has no social interaction, they can say, well, you're not the person that you were, and that's since you started these medications. So family tend to be quite a good, but it's gaining trust, and I think it's about them having trust in what you're saying, and you know, just trying to change their thought processes a little bit, I think is and you know, sometimes I'll do deals with them that just reduce it a little bit and see where we get to, rather than saying you've got to come off all of that. And I would never say you're on those 3 medications, I don't think any of them are doing anything, we're going to stop them all, because they would run out the room and never come back. I think you've got to get to know them, you've got to build trust up, and it's not a quick process, and it's certainly not something that you can just do in one appointment.
That's excellent. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Thank you very much. Neil, I can see you raised both hands, the virtual one and the real one. You're muted, we don't hear you.
Yeah, so having experienced all of what Jane has said in terms of being on a cocktail of medication myself personally, many years ago this was, by the way, and then suffering the permanent side effects of being on tramadol for probably about 3.5 years, I can fully empathise with what you're saying. Fortunately, I don't have anywhere near as much pain, and I could virtually say I'm pain-free. And that's really down to a very good service that I was referred to in Leicester. The difficulty is that I think that a lot of patients go to their GP in pain, and they actually fall into that pain trap really very quickly, because they believe that medication is the only thing that can relieve it.
They want a magic pill.
They do, absolutely. And at that point, even as a nurse, I would have sold my soul to have been pain-free at that time. I'd got 3 intravertebral prolapse discs, and it was absolute agony. I was in that 12 out of 10. But even though I should have known better, the pain overtook my thought process. I had to get rid of that pain. That was all that mattered. And you know, I remember going to my GP at one point saying, look, you know, I want you to cut my leg off. It's that bad. The pain in my leg is unbearable. I can't cope with it anymore. And they gave me more pain medication, you know, and you know, no referral to anybody else. And it was just like, I think that it's not only, you know, the advance of pain clinics like yourselves coming up, but there's also an awful lot more education that medical practitioners need in terms of managing pain, because it's highly ineffective at the moment, isn't it?
Something that our consultants in the pain clinic are working with the trainee doctors.
Absolutely.
I think they're getting something like about 3 hours training on pain in 5 years.
Yes.
And that was on all pain, not chronic pain. That was all pain. So
yeah, absolutely. And then I'm conscious that Roberta Hanlon's asked a really pertinent question, because we've talked a lot about DSE work, and obviously Roberta says that there are people that she's got on a food line, where it might be a little bit more tricky to actually get them to be able to move away from the food line, because obviously, you know, you haven't got that luxury. They're there to do that job. And if they can't do that job, it's very often the case that they're just sidelined and you have to go off sick or whatever. Is there any advice or anything that you could give in terms of, you know, in that situation?
think it's very difficult when you've got people who production workers and things like that, certainly. But employers should have policies there in place that things can be changed. Unfortunately, I mean, my background other than nursing is farming, so I know what, you know, if you can't do your job, you can't do your job, and that's a really hard line, isn't it? It is very difficult, and that's when we need to get therapy in there as quickly as we can and see what we can do for patients, and whether that means that they've got to have a slight change in their job, or they've got to look at the hours that they work, or things like that. But certainly it is a nightmare scenario, no doubt about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think with you know, occupational health in factories and industrial settings, it does become really difficult, because obviously the employer, you know, can replace that individual at the drop of a hat. It's not like, you know, they've got you know, skills that may not be able to be replaced as quickly. And I think that it does put us in a very difficult position, because we just have to say that, you know, they're not fit. But I think it would be really useful, obviously, if there was a better pain service nationally. But, you know, sadly, it's pretty much a postcode lottery unless you're willing to pay for it privately.
Yeah, it's not a sought after trendy sort of speciality, I think is the expression. You know, orthopedics get money because they generate money, and it's seen as being like frontline, but pain is very, very much forgotten about in the NHS. It's something that we have to fight for all the time in the NHS.
Yeah, chronic pain is definitely the poorer kid of the NHS. That's for certain. Neil, you said earlier that doctors were poorly trained. That's absolutely true. Outside of pain specialists, the understanding of chronic pain is almost absent from doctors. And the problem is, doctors are very good at what they're trained at and very bad at the rest. And as John said, doctors are very good, like surgeons are very good at surgeries, and doctors are very good at pharmacological management. And then if you try to have this holistic care that includes so many different pieces from so many different areas, such as physiotherapy, psychology, and all of the other components of social care, you realize that having units that are centered around a consultant and his prescription pad is not the solution. And that's also a response to Claire Davidson, who's asking in the chat, what do we think about all those patients who just have repeat prescriptions without being reviewed? I think this is a symptom of the lack of understanding by most doctors of what chronic pain is. They are trained about pain, and they understand acute pain. They understand, oh, that patient has this pain, I'm going to prescribe this medication, it's going to help for now. But actually, chronic pain is a completely different condition than acute pain. And that's the whole reason why we created Leva Clinic. It's to take away that centered care around the consultant and his prescription pad, and put it into a multidisciplinary team. So for us, when a patient arrives to our clinic, their first consultation is a full 1 hour consultation, video consultation with a psychologist, a nurse, and a physiotherapist. And you tackle the need of that patient from this 360-degree view, where you can actually say, at the end, this is what your care is going to be, this is your care plan. And in that care plan, we're going to tackle movement, we're going to tackle your mental health, we're going to tackle your pharmacological management. And sometimes, and actually most of the time, the pharmacological management is, well, we're going to decrease your opioid, we're going to decrease this, we're going to decrease that, and we're going to see where you are with all of the other aspects of your life improved and those medication decreased, so that we actually take away all those side effects. I think it's absolutely the case. Shauna, do you feel that was your experience as well?
Yeah, definitely. You know, I started living with chronic pain when I was a teenager, and so I you know, all I knew was medication, you know, that I had no idea that there was anything else out there that could support or help me. And because a lot of my contact was with doctors was through surgeons, you know, they were very good at operating on me and things like that. But when problems, you know, came up afterwards, when I found that I was living in chronic pain afterwards, they had no idea what to do with me. And so I was sent back to the GP where I was prescribed, you know, medications that I was on for years, you know, as a teenager going into my early 20s, being on, you know, several different opioids at one point, you know, and it wasn't until that I came online that I had any idea that there was any other approach available, really. You know, it's really hard when, you know, your only experience is medication, and you know, you get into the mindset of where you truly believe that nothing else could help you. And so, you know, it's difficult to get out of that mindset as a patient, to think that there are other things out there. And you know, I think we've all had experiences where we have, you know, met doctors who want to take us off everything all at once. And you know, I think just having one of those experiences can kind of put you off for a long time, of considering that, you know, it is a possibility that you could start to move away from medication and move to something else. You know, I didn't even realize for years, you know, the side effects that they were causing. And you know, actually, you know, I was in pain from doing things, but then found if I took the medication, I couldn't do anything else for days afterwards. And so in the end, I was like, well, surely it's better to just deal with the pain on its own rather than adding in all of these extra problems. You know, if I'm having difficulty anyway, then adding more on top is not the solution. But yeah, you're absolutely taught that, you know, medication is the solution.
Thank you very much. Neil, I'm conscious of time. I think we've come to the end of our hour. I just want to give some resources for the people who are present here before we leave. And I think one of the latest resources that has been published is a book by Elaine Wainwright, who's one of our advisor, and Professor Christopher Eccleston, which is called Work and Pain, a Lifespan Development Approach, which I think is going to be the bedside book of a lot of people who are highly interested in occupational health. I also wanted to talk a little bit about different apps that can help patients and that can help them get better and more comfortable with their mental health, such as Headspace or Calm, which is Calm is the #1 app for meditation and sleep in the UK. Headspace is a medication and mindfulness app. Smiling Mind. There's other apps like that that I think are tools that can really help patients. And finally, I think before we finish, I just want to say that we haven't had the time to answer everyone's questions in the chat, but if you have any dedicated questions, just please feel free to send us an email at info@levaclinic.com. Delia, so the name of the book is Work and Pain, a Lifespan Development Approach. And it's been written by Elaine Wainwright, WAINWRIGHT, and Professor Christopher Eccleston, ECCLESTON. And Janet, yes, we use validated questionnaires to measure outcome before, in the middle, and at the end of our program, so that we have a quantification of the improvement of patients. I hope I didn't last too long.
No, absolutely not. It's been wonderful. So thank you very much to all of the panel. I think it's been a tremendous webinar and really very informative. As President, on behalf of all the members, I'd like to thank you. It was brilliant. I'd also like to invite you to write for us as a multidisciplinary team, because I think that would be really useful, and particularly using the multidisciplinary team approach, and how you know, we can help those that are in chronic pain, that are in any aspect of work. I think that would be a really useful article, and obviously one that would get, you know, you some coverage as well. So thank you very much, guys. Without further ado, I shall wish you all a good night, and stop recording now. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.